who are still addicted to tobacco. The war on the environment, without which we wouldn't even have an economy. They somehow think the environment's a derivative of the economy, not the other way around. The war on school lunches, for crying out loud. Come on. It just beggars belief. The war on the public service, which has grown as the population has grown in order to maintain services that so many of us rely on. The war on councils who are already cash-strapped and yet somehow have to find money for public transport and ageing water infrastructure. If only there was a good idea that could have dealt with that water infrastructure issue. The war on the disabled community. What the heck? And for what? To save $2.9 billion so they can give landlords tax cuts. That seems not only counterintuitive, but counter to decency, which I always thought was a core value of this country. And let's not forget the war on the police, where they expect them to do more, but for less, including policing gang patches. Now, I don't know about you, but I actually quite like gang members being clearly identified. You know, it helps me pick who I'm going to road rage against. I'm like, what the hell? Yeah, all good, bro. Yeah, sweet. But yeah, Labour's values are about bringing everyone up, not just the few. We have to look out for others through times of adversity, and right now our communities need Labour. Labour lost the election and is going through a process of regrouping, reflecting and looking at their policy platform, and I know members are looking forward to being part of that process. Labour, we can never forget, is built on people. It wouldn't be Labour without all of the people in the room today. Before I introduce Chris Hipkins, I just want to share he loves his family. He's always up for a DIY project. For example, when he was doing up his parliamentary office, he did all of the demo work himself and got his dad to help him with the tiling, with the plastering. He is quite happy to have jokes made about him, particularly easy areas are him being a ginger, him being from the hut, or his tendency for sausage rolls and Coke Zero. He loves to ride his bike and cycle into work on occasion, more so now that he's not the PM. He's been an MP since 2008. Prior to that, he worked in industry training and was a staunch advocate for Vic University Students Association. He was a member of Education, Minister of Health briefly, Minister for COVID response, and we can't forget the toll that 3 years of dealing with that took on us and the impact that had on the last election. Ladies and gentlemen, non-binary friends, family, fellow villagers of Aotearoa, please welcome our leader, Chris Hipkins.
Ena mana, ena reo, ena iwi, e rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Malo ele lei, ki o rana, talofa lava, whakalofa lahi atu, malo nei, nisa bula, namaste, asalum alakum, ni hao, and warm Pacific greetings to everybody here today. 5 months ago, just over 5 months ago, I gave one of the hardest speeches of my entire political career. And that was to concede that we had lost the 2023 general election. After 6 years of turmoil marked by natural disasters, a terrorist attack, rising crime, a global pandemic, and an international cost of living crisis, New Zealanders voted for change. The incoming national government promised voters that all of the good things that had happened under Labour would continue. That the cost of living would come down, that crime would stop, that incomes would grow, that climate change would be addressed, and that we would all be better off. 5 months on, Kiwis are getting something quite different. Did New Zealanders voting for change vote to wind back our world-leading smoke-free laws in order to pay for tax cuts? Did New Zealanders voting for change think that they were voting for billions of dollars in tax breaks for landlords while threatening to cut free school lunches? Did they vote for National's new driver's tax and higher fuel prices whilst winding back almost every measure that our government had in place to tackle the challenge of climate change? Did they vote to suspend work upgrading our schools and hospitals and to stop the building of new state houses? I'm pretty certain they didn't vote for the Prime Minister to talk about tough love for others whilst claiming a $1,000 a week housing allowance that he did not need. Before the election, just about every economist in New Zealand said that the National Party's numbers just didn't add up. But Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis went round the country telling everybody that their numbers were rock solid. Day after day, it becomes abundantly clear that the economists were right and that the National Party was willing to say whatever they needed to say in order to win the election, and now they cannot deliver. Let me be absolutely clear. The financial crisis that the current government claims that they inherited is one that they have created for themselves. National told New Zealanders that their promises were affordable and that they could balance the books just by cutting back on so-called wasteful spending. Increasing the number of teachers, nurses, doctors and police that we employ and paying them better is not wasteful spending. It's certainly not wasteful spending to rebuild our schools and hospitals, our roads and our water infrastructure, and to invest in public transport. Properly supporting those with disabilities is not wasteful spending. Vital preventative health care, like free prescriptions and cheaper doctors' visits, is not wasteful spending. I could go on. The list is a long one. But let me cut to the chase. National's plan to cut spending on public services that New Zealanders rely on to fund tax cuts will leave us all worse off. The ruthless attack that we are seeing from this government on workers in our public services has been heartless and cruel. It's easy to brand public servants as faceless bureaucrats, but they are people. They're people with families, people with mortgages, and people who work hard on behalf of all of us. National's rewarding that hard work with redundancy and an uncertain future. It's easy to diminish the work of our public servants. 5 years ago, if we had known that we had a team in the Ministry of Health that was dedicated to planning for a global pandemic, we might have questioned the value of having a team of people focused on planning for something that may never happen, until it did happen. And then the question wasn't why we had invested in the planning, but why we hadn't invested more in the planning. When we became the government in 2017, Mycoplasma bovis was wreaking havoc on dairy farms up and down New Zealand. We made the difficult decision as a government that we were going to invest in elimination of M. bovis, but that we were also going to invest in strengthening our border defences so that biosecurity incursions like M. bovis couldn't wreak havoc on our primary sector and on the industries that we rely on for an income again in the future. National's cuts in this past week to Customs and the Ministry for the Primary Industries shows that they have learned nothing from their own past mistakes. Whilst not every investment that we made over the past 6 years has delivered an immediate result, National's claim that the government was full of wasteful spending was plain wrong, and now they're finding out just how wrong they actually were. The government's lower spending goal means that they're going to be taking from the many to give to the few, and life will get worse for most New Zealanders. This National-led government believes that its role is to do things to people rather than with them. It's a government of entrenched privilege and entitlement, a government for the few, not the many. Our country is not a company, and it shouldn't be governed as if it is. Slavery and child labour weren't outlawed because of some cost-benefit analysis. They were outlawed because it was the right thing to do. Not every government decision comes down to what is best for the bottom line. Kiwis deserve a government that puts people first. We deserve a government that backs Kiwis to come together to support each other so that we can all thrive. I accept that New Zealanders voted for change at the last election, but Kiwis would be quite right to be asking right now whether the change that they thought they were voting for is the change this government are delivering. There is a better way. Throughout our history, Labour's been the party of positive change, the party that moves New Zealand forward, and the party that ensures that everyone has a stake in the future of our amazing country. From our founding, Labour has been guided by a clear set of principles and values. We believe in inequality and the notion that all those who work hard should be able to get ahead, enjoy the fruits of their labour, and create a better life for themselves and their families. It's in our name. Labour was founded on the idea that hard work should pay off and that those who generate wealth should enjoy their fair share of it. We believe in the common good, that we're stronger together, and that when we look out for each other, we're all going to be better off. We value equality, opportunity, responsibility, and a fair go for everyone. And an extra word that I'll add in there because Oscar just mentioned it, and it's one that often gets forgotten: we believe in an egalitarian society. I recall in my first term as an MP, meeting with an organisation called the Roots of Empathy. If there are teachers in the room, you might have heard of them. They run a program in schools where they bring babies into the classroom to teach young Kiwis how to care for and be empathetic towards those who are more vulnerable to them. There were two stories that they told me which resonated. The first was they gave me a little booklet that was full of photos of babies and all of their different emotional states. As a parent, I could empathise with that. There was babies who were sad, sleepy, hungry, angry, all of the emotions, and then there was a baby that was crying. They told me that when they showed these photos to other babies of the same age, most of the babies they showed the picture of the baby crying would lean forward and kiss the photo. Empathy is something that we are all born with, and it is an inherent human characteristic. We all have the capacity to care and to show empathy. It's one of the features that defines us as human beings. But actually it was the second of the stories that they told me that was perhaps the one that I have never forgotten and that I will carry with me for as long as I am on this earth. The founder of the Roots of Empathy program told me about an instance where a young teacher who was on maternity leave took her newborn baby into a classroom full of primary school-aged children. All of the kids took their turns holding the baby and learning about how vulnerable babies were. But there was one kid in that classroom that held back and that didn't do it. And then all of the other kids started to leave to go for morning tea. And that one child, he went up to the teacher and said, "Can I have my turn to hold the baby?" And the teacher looked at the child concerned and was a little nervous, but said, "Yes, okay." And that boy went and sat in the corner and cradled the baby and provided it with all of this love and care and sung it songs and so on. But then when he handed the baby back to the teacher, much to her relief, he said to her, "Do you think it's possible for a child that has never been loved to be a loving father?" Now, the reason that stuck out for me was because she then showed me a photo of that very same boy. He had been one of the most troubled kids in the school, always in trouble and destined for a life of trouble. She then showed me a photo of him as an adult with his beautiful young family. We all have that capacity within us. When we create those moments, when we show genuine respect, when we show humanity towards one another, when we foster empathy, we can change lives. In today's world, we're all encouraged to look out for number one, to place our own interests above the interests of those who are around us. Competition and individualism have been society's backing track for the last 40 years. But never have so many felt so dissatisfied, so disempowered, and so left behind. But it hasn't always been that way, and it doesn't have to be that way in the future. Every year at Anzac Day, we remember those who sacrificed for the freedoms that we so often take for granted today. I reflect on my grandparents' generation. The sacrifice and the contribution that they made didn't end when the Second World War ended. I reflect on how the perils of war drew them together and forged a collective spirit that helped to shape the peace that followed the war. After the fighting had stopped, their hard work continued. They built schools, they built hospitals, roads, power plants, and of course, houses. They found comfort in each other through RSAs, through bowling clubs, on the sports field, and in the large workplaces that were much more common back then. They viewed the taxes that they paid as their contribution to the type of society that they wanted to live in. They strove for a society that was free from oppression, but not just political oppression, a society free from economic and social oppression as well. The world's a very different place these days, and the things that worked for their generation wouldn't necessarily work today and be the right answers for today's challenges. But what they did do shows how the collective effort and contribution that they made can benefit everyone. When government action brings people together, our whole society can thrive. It's not hard to contrast that approach and the commitment of my grandparents' generation with the aggressive drive towards individualism and dog-eat-dog competition that's prevailed since the 1980s. Later this year, we will mark a significant and a challenging milestone in the Labour Party's history. Someone grab me a glass of water. It will be the 40th anniversary of the election of the fourth Labour government. We'll remember with pride the early steps that that government took to stamp our proudly nuclear-free mark on our foreign policy. The work that government took to advance human rights, particularly in areas like homosexual law reform. And the work that that government did to bring conservation and environmental issues much more to the fore. But I know we'll also look back with much more mixed feelings on the economic reforms of that and subsequent governments, and the 4 decades of growing inequality and societal decay that we have seen since then. 40 years on, it's long since time that we acknowledged that a rising economic tide does not lift all boats. The majority find themselves constantly bailing water just to stay afloat, and far too many have been left to simply sink. Our current economic model celebrates those who live off wealth over those who live off work. In the modern economy, contribution and reward aren't as linked as they used to be. Hard work is no longer the ticket to getting ahead that it should be. While some earn more than they are worth, the majority are worth a lot more than they earn. Success and aspiration should be celebrated, but when hard work no longer pays off, it's time for a rethink of the system. Around the world, a populist backlash against so-called elites demonstrates that people have had enough of being told that if they just work harder, the benefits will flow, when they are working harder than ever and they are finding the benefits don't come. Younger working Kiwis struggle to get onto the home ownership ladder, something the current government's prioritisation of the economic interests of landlords is only going to make worse. Worldwide, we're seeing increasing concern that the next generation could be the first to be worse off than their parents. Increasing numbers of self-employed Kiwis find themselves driving down their own pay to compete in a race to the bottom. Economic insecurity touches the lives of more and more Kiwis every day. The world around us continues to change and evolve at an ever-increasing pace. Globalisation, automation, the rise of digital technology, the increase in self-employment, increasing life expectancy, these are all realities we live with. We cannot long for a return to a bygone era when that world no longer exists. Our great challenge today is to shape and craft an alternative that speaks to the future rather than to the past. Technology makes the free flow of creativity and ideas borderless. People are more mobile than ever before. Protectionist rhetoric, as we see from the populist right, might be safe, comfortable and easy, but embracing the harsh reality that the world won't be the way that it used to be is much harder, but is also vital. We don't need to accept that the corporatised, dehumanised approach that's dominated the globe for the past 3 or 4 decades is the only way. It isn't. A new approach that democratises, empowers and ensures the benefits of success are shared amongst the many and not hoarded by the few is possible. Labour's mission is that of a fairer society where everyone has the chance to get ahead, where inequality is confronted head-on, and where our faith in the role of government to do good things for everybody is restored. Labour's challenge in the modern world is to define what the new collectivism looks like. It won't be the same as it was when mass industrialisation and working class solidarity were the dominant features of most workplaces. Today's workplaces are less secure. That's a fact. Technology makes jobs redundant at a faster rate than ever before, and the rapacious rise of AI is going to make that faster still. That's why the investment we make in our people has never been more important. The work we did over the past 6 years to modernise our education system was vital. We should also remember that today's generation of school leavers, the ones that our Prime Minister likes to spread so much anxiety about, did almost all of their primary schooling during the era of national standards. Slogans are not solutions. I passionately believe in the power of education to transform lives. Reverting to a 20th century model of educational delivery just isn't going to cut it in the 21st century. During the election campaign, I visited a small firm and a TV production house in Gisborne. They're running a training and employment program for their largely younger staff. And I spoke to one of the workers there who was turning her life around. She'd got a job there, a traineeship there, after being on a benefit. But she'd also been in rather a lot of trouble, dealing drugs and other stuff. Her job and her training had given her a positive reason to get out of bed every morning. She had something to be excited about. Her learning was giving her hope for the future. Her job and her learning were both supported by a range of programs that were put in place by our Labour government. We need more on-job learning, more apprenticeships, and an ongoing focus on the skills that our people are going to need to thrive in the 21st century. It's far better to invest in human potential than to squander it. Now, I've heard people say that they think Labour's soft on crime. Nothing could be further from the truth. But a race to outbid each other when it comes to longer sentences isn't going to address the underlying problem of why so much crime is taking place in the first place. If we want safer communities, we have to get serious about tackling the causes of crime. When I speak to the dairy owners who have been the victims of ram raids, They are at the absolute end of their tether. Their businesses aren't just where they work, they're often their homes as well. They work so hard, and they shouldn't have to endure the fear and the insecurity that they are currently experiencing. But when I talk to them, they also express concern for the future of the kids who have been doing that ram raiding. They often know those kids' families. They know their backgrounds. And they want to know what we're going to do to give those kids a better future. Not one where they spend a life in and out of prison. We've well and truly established that that's expensive, it doesn't work, and it is such a waste of human potential. Our investments in our people are investments in the future prosperity and safety of all of us. If we really want to be tough on crime, we should spend a lot more time and energy breaking the cycle before people offend. We also need to recognise and celebrate the contribution of those who put the interests of others ahead of their own. A few days after becoming Prime Minister, I flew into Auckland to inspect the damage caused by the extensive flash flooding. A few weeks after that, I was in the Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti seeing firsthand the devastation that Cyclone Gabrielle had wrought. The power of Mother Nature to destroy felt a little overwhelming. But within the destruction and the devastation, I also saw inspiration. I saw Kiwis doing what we do best, coming together to support each other in times of adversity. In a small rural pub, I spoke to a nurse who was part of a makeshift health clinic. It was set up to support those who had been affected by the cyclone. We talked about the types of issues they were dealing with, the types of health problems people were needing support with. And then I asked her how she was going, and she cried. She told me how she had lost everything in the flooding. But she didn't have time to think about that. She was too busy helping other people. I'll never forget that conversation, or the countless others that I had during that time. When we're tested to our limits, we see the true nature of the human spirit. What I saw during those disasters was a solidarity and a compassion that gave me enormous hope. In the face of the havoc that this government is wreaking, Labour has to provide New Zealanders with hope. To do that, we all need to be on the same page, and I believe our values bring us together. As a united and focused team, we can define the policies and the ideas that will drive Kiwi prosperity into the next generation. Our country is not a company, and our citizens are not just consumers. More people smoking might be good for the government's bottom line, but it won't make for a healthier and better society. Cutting school lunches and support for those with disabilities might help Nicola Willis to balance the budget, but at what cost to those who are missing out? We need to make sure that hard work pays off and that we tackle inequality head on. Kiwis shouldn't have to work multiple jobs just to keep their heads above water. Those who help to create the nation's wealth should enjoy their fair share of it. Rising wages, improved working conditions, closing the gender pay gap, and creating the right conditions so that our businesses can thrive and their workers can share in the rewards will be key goals for our next government. For the first time in my lifetime, we currently have a government that's taking us backwards when it comes to outcomes for Māori, ignoring and in some cases reversing the huge progress that we've made as a nation to right the wrongs of the past. That's not just bad for Māori, it is bad for all of us. Labour will stand alongside our Indigenous people as they face the disgusting barrage they're facing from this government. And then when we are in government, we will once again continue the work that we were doing to lift outcomes for Māori. we need to keep investing in all of our people. We need health and education systems that meet the needs of the 21st century. We need a welfare system that recognises that kicking people when they are down is not a way to get them back onto their feet. We need to keep rebuilding our public services and institutions, and not just the buildings that they're in. The digital world is here, and we need to deliver our public services in a way that embraces that. We need to place sustainability at the core of all that we do. We have one planet and one chance. I don't want my kids, my grandkids, and my great-grandkids to find that the legacy we leave them is one of a planet that they cannot live on, swim on, plant on, and explore like we do today. When we say that climate change is the preeminent challenge of our generation, we need to match those words with action. Climate change isn't just a challenge, it's an enormous opportunity, if we're willing to grasp it. New Zealand can be a world leader, the world leader, in sustainable food production, renewable energy, and science and innovation. There's money in our international brand, and we shouldn't squander that. And yes, we need to talk about tax. Our current tax system is inequitable, and it's unsustainable. We have one of the least diversified tax systems in the world, meaning public investment into things like health, education, welfare, housing, and infrastructure is more reliant on income tax than most of the other countries that we compare ourselves to. In other words, those who are living their earning through salary and wages are contributing a greater share than those who earn their income through wealth. Under this government, those with multiple investment properties are getting huge tax breaks, while those on salary and wages pay tax on every single dollar that they earn. When even the IMF is saying that our tax system is broken, it really is time to do something. As the way that we live and work continues to change, with a smaller proportion of the workforce earning taxable salary and wages, reform of our tax system isn't just a matter for the idealists. It's going to become an economic necessity. Now is the time for us to have that debate. After the election, I said that all of the options on changes to the tax system were back on the table, and I meant that. Shortly, the Labour Party Policy Council will be releasing a series of discussion documents on key issues that we're going to be working on over the next 2 years, and one of those will be tax. It's going to set out some of our options for future tax policy, and it's intended to help inform the debate. But how we shape the solution is going to be up to all of us. Our work on future policy isn't going to be immediate. It's going to take some time, as it should, because all of the issues that I have just mentioned can't be considered in isolation from one another. We will use our time in opposition to listen, to build relationships, to research, to develop new ideas, and to develop new policies. When the 2026 general election rolls around, we will be more prepared for government than any opposition in New Zealand's history. I was recently reminded of some of the words in my maiden speech. Thank you, John Campbell. I said we need to reignite the fire of our collective spirit. We need to rediscover what it means to be part of a community. And I spoke of values, my values, Labour values, and the values that I believe have defined New Zealand society. Compassion, respect, fairness, friendship, love, and forgiveness. In politics, values matter. We should talk about them a lot more. Because when I look at the actions of this new government, I see very different values in play to the ones that I hold and the ones that I believe define and motivate our Labour movement. They're putting landlords ahead of hungry kids, smoking revenue ahead of people's health, and tax cuts ahead of supporting our most vulnerable, like those living with disabilities. We are a better country than that. New Zealand is a country that abounds with opportunity. Together, our job is to ensure that everyone can benefit from that. Our mission is to create a prosperous, inclusive New Zealand where everyone has a role to play and nobody gets left behind. Let's make that happen by working together. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Ladies
over there. All right, kia ora koutou everybody. I'm happy to go straight into questions.
Why now for looking?
I made it pretty clear after the last election that we needed to put all the options back on the table and that included tax. I think if you see the IMF report even just this last couple of days, it shows that we have got some structural issues in our tax system that we do need to look at. Being in opposition is a good opportunity for us to do that. It gives us time, it gives us space away from the day-to-day pressure of governing to actually look at what we think a fairer tax system might look like in the future.
The IMF suggests the capital gains tax and a land tax. Do you have anything?
I'm not going to narrow the options down at this point, but I do think we need to recognise that our tax system relies heavily on salary and wage earners, contributing a greater share of the overall tax revenue that the government receives than in other countries. And so I think we need to make sure that we're addressing that fundamental weakness in our tax system. How we do that, I think we'll work through a range of options.
You've previously ruled those changes out. What has changed?
Well, I only ruled them out for the term, so I was pretty clear going into the election campaign. Do you want me to wait till the plane's gone past? Yeah.
Welcome to
It's a challenging venue for this. They probably do. What was your question again? Yeah, I was very clear before the last election that I was setting out Labor's tax policy for the next term, and that every term, we'd set out clearly our tax policy. Obviously, we didn't win the election, so that gives us an opportunity now to go back and reassess.
Given you seem to be saying, you can go away into discussion, can you guarantee you will vote into the next election with a very clear plan? And will you give voters enough time to actually understand it? Because a capital gains tax, for instance, is quite complicated. People in the past didn't understand that it wasn't on plan behind.
Yeah, the answer to both of those questions is yes. We realise that we need to have a tax policy formulated well before the election so that New Zealanders have an opportunity to understand that. And actually, so we don't do what the National Party did at the last election, which was release their tax policy at the last minute, so that by the time people had worked out that it didn't add up, actually a whole lot of people had voted already. We want to make sure that people know what our tax policy is well before the election so that they can scrutinise it and they can understand what it will mean for them.
You had a whole plan to make the tax system fair, but you threw it out because you were scared to take it to the election. What's changed?
No, that wasn't the only reason. There were a variety of factors at play there. But that was then, this is now. We'll have a different tax policy before the next election.
Do you have the credibility to sell a fair tax system given that you scrapped the tax system?
What I said all along was that we would determine our tax policy term by term. I've never bought into this idea that you should rule out things forever. I've always said that each term we'll set out our tax policy, and the work that we've got to do now is to set out our tax policy for the next term. As I said, that was then and this is now. We're going back to the drawing board. We lost the election. That means that we do have to take the opportunity to go back and to reflect and to come up with something different for next time.
Was a GST-free policy in the state?
As I said, that was then and this is now. The policies that we took into the election were only one of the factors that contributed to us not winning that election. But clearly we need to go into the election with some different ideas.
Just on the tax policy, you say it's going to be ready by 2026, but how are you going to keep the public informed about the plan heading into the next election?
Well, of course, we need to formulate our policy first. So that will be a job for the Labour Party. And I'll be, along with Barbara Edmonds and Deborah Russell, our relevant spokespeople, I'll be leading that process. And we will go into the election campaign with a very clear, well-developed and well-understood tax policy. And that's the job that we've got ahead of us.
Does it sit right you going into an election saying, hey, we're going to bring in new taxes?
No one ever loves the prospect of new taxes, but the reality is our tax system is unsustainable in its current form, and political parties who try and argue otherwise aren't being upfront and honest with the New Zealand public.
Will you keep the deductibility in place for landlords?
We will consider our overall approach to tax as a package, because what you do around interest deductibility would also depend on decisions made around other forms of taxation for the same property owners as well. You can't consider those things in isolation from each other.
And so how much of this is, and you talked about sort of, the change in the economy, how much of this now is because the country's in a recession?
Times are tough for New Zealanders, I absolutely acknowledge that, but we also have to be thinking about a better future, and that better future is one in which New Zealand workers can actually enjoy the benefits of their hard work. Increasingly we hear from Kiwis that they're working harder and harder and harder, and they're not really experiencing the sort of progress that they would like to. Tax is only one part of that equation, as I spelled out in my speech. There's a variety of other things we need to do as well. We need to make work pay in New Zealand. We need to make it so that when you go out and you work hard, you can actually get ahead from that hard work.
Unemployment rising to 5.2%, 32%. What does that look like? What is that going to mean?
I think rising unemployment is never going to be good for New Zealand. The sorts of numbers that we're talking about now are effectively the population of Gisborne could effectively find themselves, the equivalent of the population of Gisborne could find themselves out of a job. That's going to be really bad for those families. It's going to be really bad for the country as a whole. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real people. They've got homes, families, mortgages, rent to pay. We've got to focus on keeping people in employment. I'm really proud of the fact that during during the last 6 years, when we saw projections showing that we could have a double-digit spike in unemployment, we took action to stop that happening and to keep people in work.
How much blame does Labor take for the effect of our position given most of that data comes at the time of the government?
I think if you look at the global economic conditions, it was always going to be a challenging environment for New Zealand. China has rebounded from COVID slower than many people expected, and China is our largest trading partner. There are a range of other factors. The cost of living spike that we've seen in New Zealand has actually been repeated around the world, and all of these things have had an effect on the New Zealand economy. Well, of course, I'm not going to predetermine what our tax policy is going to be, but we will have one, and it will be comprehensive and it will be well understood before the election. Well, whenever the next election rolls around, we need to be ready for that. We also are mindful that the current government is probably the most unstable government that we've seen in New Zealand's MMP history, and so we need to be aware of the fact that it might not go the full term. But we will make sure that we're ready whenever the election rolls around. We've done some internal reviews of the election campaign itself. But actually, just as important as that, alongside our policy development, we'll of course be reviewing our progress over the last 6 years. So it won't just be about the last campaign, it'll be about the things that we did in government, the things that we're proud of, that worked well, lessons to learn from that time, and we're going to make sure that we build that into our policies for next time.
You don't have a favourite tax, or a gains tax, or a land tax?
Naturally, I have a range of different views on that, but I think it's important that we have as other members of the Labor Party will have as well, and as other members of the team will have. I think it's important that we create an environment where people are, free to share their views, to make sure that there will be differences, to make sure that we can work together to come up with a tax policy that will actually help to take New Zealand forward.
Obviously, the party's actually done a lot of work on wealth tax, and especially put on the CGT numbers in the past. Aren't you just redoing work that really been done? Why can't you just
Things move on. The reality is that we're not in the same position as a country that we were. It was about 12 years ago, I think, when Labor's original CGT tax policy was developed. A lot's changed since then, so we've got to make sure that we're speaking to the future, not to the past. Okay. I'll wait for a minute. I haven't got any details of what's happened there in Gisborne, but obviously the reports that I've seen are very concerning, be very upsetting for that community. And I do have faith in the New Zealand Police to undertake the necessary investigations that need to take place to figure out what happened, whether there should be greater accountability amongst the people who may have caused that. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody.